Oh, today I'd like to talk to people about aquariums and answering one of those questions from a different perspective. Um, can you start your very first aquarium as a saltwater tank? A lot of people will immediately come out and tell you, oh, no, 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 you don't want to do that. You should start with freshwater because saltwater is expensive, it's a lot harder, and that sort of thing. The truth of the matter is, really, it lies somewhere in between because there are both advantages and disadvantages of going with both. The advantages of starting with freshwater first is it will teach you some good habits, such as testing your water for ammonia, nitrates, and that sort of thing, uh, and getting you in the habit of doing that. It also gets you in the habit of doing water changes, changing filters on a regular basis, and getting a balance between like overfeeding and underfeeding fish. So in that sense, it actually teaches you some good habits. In addition, freshwater is significantly cheaper than salt water. So if you do screw up, the mistakes aren't nearly as costly. That said, however, freshwater also teaches you some bad habits that do not translate well to saltwater. For example, I see numerous tanks, people struggling when they get into saltwater, trying to figure out what they're doing wrong, and then they show you the picture of their tanks, and they've got driftwood, they've got gravel, under gravel filters, they've got bubblers, they've got the goofy decorations, the sunken ship and the fake plants and everything in the tank. And although these things are reasonable choices for a freshwater tank, they're completely 100% wrong for saltwater. You don't want to put that garbage, quite frankly, in a saltwater tank, because what ends up happening, particularly with decorations and those sorts of things, salt water is going to corrode them and it's going to release toxins into the water, which are not good for your fish. So you really have to ask yourself, does it make sense for you to put a cheap $5 to $10 piece of fake plastic, plant into your tank, knowing full well that it's made in China and going to corrode? So these are the sort of things that I've seen in terms of, freshwater people trying to convert over to saltwater, and just one of the most common newbie mistakes they make in the process. So in that sense, freshwater actually does you a disservice, because it doesn't educate you in terms of what is appropriate for a marine environment. The other thing, of course, obviously, is cost. As I mentioned, you need to be prepared for saltwater. It is expensive, and you do need to be prepared for that. And you need to be prepared that if you're going to do it as a first-time tank, you're probably going to have some expensive mistakes. Just be prepared for that. If you're not prepared for that and you're not patient, don't do saltwater, period, whether you're experienced in freshwater or not. Live rock is probably the most expensive thing, at least in terms of the initial startup costs in the tank. It runs between $5 and $7 a pound, and it's recommended that you have at least 1 pound of live rock or dry rock to be seeded for live rock for every gallon of tank. So, you can imagine that sort of adds up. It's also recommended, you have something like live sand or whatever as a substrate in a marine tank. And so, as such, what you're looking at doing is putting in, like in my case, I have a 36-gallon tank and I have a 40-pound bag of live sand as my substrate, and that was about $40. So it's about $1 a pound, roughly. So the live sand, unless you're getting a really big tank, isn't a considerable expense, but it is an expense nonetheless that you need to be aware of. But the thing that is another benefit, as it were, for the marine environment is that the live rock and the live sand are a crucial biological filter, and that's what a lot of people don't understand if they don't do the research on it. These things actually help maintain your water parameters. They make it a lot easier. So in that sense, actually, saltwater tanks get a huge benefit that freshwater tanks don't get, because you have this massive biological filter that can help maintain the water parameters of your tank. I've been running my saltwater tank for roughly 6 months, and after the cycle completed, I've never had an issue with ammonia or nitrites. Basically the filtration just takes care of itself on that one. So the only thing I have to watch out for are the nitrates, of course, which any fish tank you're going to have to watch out for, regardless whether it's freshwater or saltwater. Saltwater tanks are, as mentioned, more expensive. The fish are more expensive. A lot of things that you do with saltwater tanks, you have to make sure the equipment specifically says that it's usable and suitable for marine environments. And I mean, that means your tank heater, that means your filtration, and whatever media bags you put in the filter. I'm personally a fan, and I like to use the ChemiPure Elite bags. They're not super expensive, and they work great in my little hang-on back filter that I have on my 36-gallon bow front mini reef. You also want to make sure that you have the proper education every step of the way. If you're going into saltwater tanks, regardless of whether you have freshwater experience or not, research everything, and I mean months. Spend months researching. You can research on YouTube, talk to your local fish stores, the ones that have saltwater and marine stuff. Definitely talk to them. Research some of the forums out there online, and just get a general knowledge and experience from these people. And you have to research everything, every step of the way. I mean, I would go so far to say, especially if you're brand new going in, I would even research how to, properly clean out a new tank, because you do need to clean it out. A lot of times the manufacturers put these labels on them with adhesive, and yes, you do need to remove that, and you don't want to just, fill it with water and say, oh, let's go for it. Don't do that. Take it from a guy who made some mistakes in the cleaning process and ended up costing him dearly. For the record, I am a guy who started strictly with saltwater, and I did make some expensive newbie mistakes, but as such, I learned from them. I still did a lot of research, so I still made the mistakes even though I researched, but you have to also, as well, be very patient with saltwater tanks with cycling, because that's where like 99.9% of mistakes with saltwater come, because people don't let their tanks properly cycle first, and then yes, you're hosed. The saltwater cycling process usually takes between about 30 and 60 days. If you do dry rock seeded with live rock, it is going to take longer. So just be prepared for that. So if you're not prepared to have the patience to leave your tank alone for a period of 30 to 60 days, don't even think about getting a saltwater tank. That's all there is to it. You have to have the patience to just leave the thing alone. One of the common mistakes that newbies make when they do saltwater tanks is that they see everything as showing zero, your ammonia, your nitrites, your nitrates, everything's showing zero, and they assume the process is done. Well, no, it's not done until that brown algae bloom comes in and basically comes and goes. Once that is done, then your tank is fully cycled, and as well as, of course, everything showing zero. Realistically, you'll hear a lot of rumors with saltwater tanks that everything should be zero. Your nitrites should be zero, your ammonia should be zero, your nitrates should be zero. Well, for the nitrites and ammonia, you're right, they should be zero. But realistically, once you start adding even crabs, hermit crabs for your cleanup crew, once you start adding fish, you're going to have nitrates, period. Even if you never fed your tank, you would still have nitrates, just because of the simple fact that they're going to produce them. So you will never have them at zero. So if you hear anybody claiming that your nitrates should be zero, they don't know what they're talking about, and quite honestly, I wouldn't be taking advice from them, because it's not reality. Realistically, your nitrates, generally, if you've got a handful of fish in there and crabs, you're going to be sitting at about 10 on your nitrate scale in most cases. Usually when it gets into that 20 to 30 range, that's when you want to be, doing water changes and that sort of thing. Which brings up something else. You definitely don't want to do a water change while the tank is cycling in a saltwater tank. So, anyways, I've gotten a little bit off topic here per se, but for those of you, ultimately, it comes down to, for those of you looking to get into a saltwater tank as your very first aquarium, you can do it. And as I said, you just have to research everything from multiple sources, and to double check with other people who are in the hobby and stuff like that. Research everything every step of the way, and be prepared. You're probably going to have some expensive mistakes in the process, but once again, just because you've had experience in freshwater doesn't mean that you're not necessarily going to avoid some of these same mistakes. So I would say my recommendation would be, for first-time aquarists, if you want to get into saltwater, do so, but do so with extreme caution. And if you have experience in freshwater, the advice is the same. Do so, but do so with extreme caution, with lots of research. Well, that's about it, and thanks for watching.